views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. The New York State Legislature concluded its session last week, and one of the startling results was their inability to come up with a plan to continue mayoral control in our schools. As a result, the city's public schools are looking at a renewal of the old Community District Board of Education system. Also, with an overhaul of our healthcare systems looming at the federal level, what, if anything, can New York State do to soften the blow of potential cuts? Tonight's guest is Assemblyman Louis Sepulveda, and he will address those issues. We'll also have him comment on the local political scene, including questions about his own plans. And as time allows, we'll talk about issues in his Parkchester, Soundview, Zariga district. Please join me in welcoming back to Bronx Talk the Assemblyman from the 87th District in the Bronx, Assemblyman Louis Sepulveda. Nice to have you.
Thank you. Nice to be back here again.
Well, let's start right at the top, and we can talk about some general issues with the session, but none more striking than the legislature's inability to address, solve, come up with an answer, make a decision on the question of whether the mayoral control of schools idea should be continued. There are many angles to this, but in general, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's necessary to reestablish mayoral control for the city of New York. Look what happened in the past when you had the school boards, the amount of corruption that existed at the time, the incompetency of the school boards, kids were suffering academically. And if you look at what's happened since you've had mayoral control, you can't deny that it's been, regardless of your leanings, political leanings, you can't deny that there's been a significant improvement in the educational system of the city of New York. But right now we're mired in politics, and that's all that it is. The Republicans in the state Senate were very willing to give Bloomberg 4 or 5 years of mayoral control, and that's because Bloomberg contributed mightily to Republican campaigns when he was mayor. They are now upset with Mayor de Blasio because he immersed himself in Senate races a couple of years ago. And as a leading Democrat in the state, what else is the mayor supposed to do? So he tried to flip the Senate, the Democrats, and so they're upset with him about that. You look at the charter schools, the Republicans have very few charter schools in their districts. But the reason that they're the big defendants, the big representatives of charter schools is because the charter school movement contributed mightily, millions and millions of dollars to the campaigns of the Republicans. And so I don't necessarily believe that they're such big proponents of the charter school movement. I think more so that they are protecting their political contributions. On the other side, of course, we have the United Federation of Teachers. They contributed mightily to Democratic causes, Democratic Party. And what's happening here is that our kids, those that we should be the most concerned with, are getting caught in this crossfire, in this vitriol, in this lack of communication that exists so mightily in state government.
I guess that's how I was planning to respond, in that, okay, so you've outlined the political dynamics at work here. Without having to go through the whole thing, the mayor supported Democratic candidates. The Republicans didn't like it. There are, of course, campaign contributions coming from the charter school side, which, of course, is what the Senate wanted to tie it to.
That's correct.
But is there nobody in the state legislature who will say, you know what, all this aside, we've got 1 million children. It is maybe the most important thing to millions of parents in the city of New York, and nobody in the state legislature of any authority can rise above these things and say, you know what, let's just figure out the best system to run the schools and let politics run its own course. Nobody can do that in the state.
Unfortunately, in this particular climate,
Can't be done.
It's very difficult, and the reality is that most of these Republicans that are opposing extension don't have any race in the horse of the city schools. They don't have public schools in their district. This is all New York City.
Many of them are
upstate
right.
and Long Island.
So this is a way of punishing the mayor, in essence, getting him back.
For doing what he's supposed to do as a Democrat in the city.
And using the children of the city of New York as a pawn. It's remarkable.
Right.
The way the dialogue or the negotiations have been laid out in the media is that the Republicans would not break apart the idea of mayoral control from the idea of support for charter schools. And then your colleague, Assemblyman Carl Hastie, who's the speaker, said, we want to negotiate the mayoral control bill separately from that.
Right.
But now, as I understand, Speaker Hastie has connected you're going to connect it to the charter school thing. I'm going to now connect the negotiation on mayoral control to the renewal of sales tax collection. I have that right?
Well,
this is what I'm hearing?
That's correct. But, you have to understand something. I mean, I think the people who wanted to couple both issues together, that started with the Republicans in the Senate, because they know that this is a sensitive issue to the Democrats, especially most of us from downstate in the Assembly. So I believe the Speaker's position, and he's been very strong on that, is if you want to start coupling things, then we're going to start coupling other things that impact your districts. So let's be fair and let's deal with each issue separately. It's the Republicans in the Senate that have refused to do that.
Some of your colleagues in the Assembly who I've spoken to, aside from the TV show, we will try to have them on the show, as a matter of fact, have told me that there's a possibility the governor is going to say, well, wait a minute, let's call everybody back and let's get this done. We have one issue, let's get this done, irrespective of everything else. Do you think that is going to happen?
Well, I think if there's one individual that can certainly move the needle, and unfortunately, to my liking, he hasn't been as involved as he should have been from the very beginning, is the governor. His relationship, as we all know, with the mayor is terrible at best. But regardless of that, it is the governor who has to show the most leadership in state government, because he is the most powerful guy. And since the budget was passed, he hasn't been very visible in negotiations on anything.
Isn't the question of mayoral control a lot larger than the name of Bill de Blasio? Because we're now talking about a conceptual organization of the city schools, which, of course, maybe they won't do a 4-year extension that'll go beyond his term at this point. But really, it's a conceptual thing, I think, more so than, well, we're going to give Bill de Blasio what he wants. Isn't it kind of, isn't that really the ultimate issue here? And I guess maybe I'm being Pollyanna, trying to separate it from politics, and we don't seem to be able to get there.
But you're absolutely right. The only thing that we should be concerned about, there has to be some things that are that you cannot use politics as much as they're doing now. There's some things that are sacrilegious. Educating our kids is one of those things. I wish we can get rid ourselves of the politics. I could work with anybody on any side, any aisle, the Republicans, the Democrats. We have to come together and put our kids first.
As I understand it, if we do get a Board of Education again, then there will be more charter school representatives on this Board of Education.
Well, I know that the charter school movement will run more candidates. Since they have deeper pockets, they'll probably succeed.
In some cases.
In many cases, I think. But I think that would be catastrophic, not necessarily that they're getting involved in elections, but what would happen to the entire educational system in the city of New York would be catastrophic.
Fascinating interplay about charter schools in the borough of the Bronx. Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. has come out as one of the supporters of charter schools. He was one of the people that marched across the Brooklyn Bridge at some point. Obviously, the mayor has not been one who wants to increase the cap. So let's put it on Louis Sepulveda's table. How do you feel about the idea of an increased cap on charter schools in the state of New York, or even in the Bronx in your district?
Yeah, well, my position has been well known, that I don't demonize the charter school movement. I have several charter schools that are very successful in my district. I have, one of the few blue ribbon schools in the state of New York is in my district, the Bronx Charter School for Excellence. The kids there are doing well. They're all going to college. They're all, when they leave there, they go out and they're doing very well. You have the level of parent involvement. I say take the good things that you get out of the charter schools and try to duplicate them in the public school system. Of course, the public school system is handcuffed with some issues. There's some things that the public school systems can't do, but you have to be able to. I mean, people don't understand is that kids that are going to charter schools the charter schools are public schools.
So you don't have just to summarize that, you don't have a blanket statement. You like the idea of charter schools, but you feel like there could be some increase as long as we get good schools out of it.
Well, listen, I've spoken with the mayor. The mayor is not inherently opposed to charter schools, regardless of what you hear. Even Michael Mulgrew, the president of the union, is not inherently opposed to charter schools. But the problem is that there's some things, you can't deny that there's some restrictions that the public schools have that the charter schools don't have, and that tends to elevate the scores.
We could spend all night on
Absolutely.
this education thing. I have one last question because it came up. It's not.
And by the way, the charter school caps have not all been used yet, so
So we still have more room.
We still have more room, so that's why the whole argument on increasing doesn't make sense to me right now.
Not in your district, but it was interesting, and many Bronxites noted it with interest, that Success Academy got a hold of the old courthouse, and they're going to be built. I mean, to me, it is a real stake in the ground in the center of the South Bronx that they're going to be building this charter school.
No, they already have. They have many in the Bronx, and in fact,
no. But what I'm saying is they got the old courthouse to launch from.
To launch from, yeah.
Do you think that because this is not the kind of charter school that you were talking about? This is a for-profit private charter school. What are your thoughts about that?
Look, I like it. Whatever school is gonna educate our children well, I will be their advocate. The problem with Success is that Eva Moskowitz has become too political. She's toxic. And rather than becoming someone who can work with the mayor, the public school system, she becomes very difficult to deal with. And I think she, although Success has been very successful, for lack of a better word, I think it could be more successful if not for Eva Moskowitz.
Let's move on and talk about something else I brought up at the top of the show. Many people in New York State are worried about the kinds of cuts that could come through if the Senate, in fact, passes the new Health Care Act, the one that will repeal Obamacare. There's been a lot of talk. The governor talks very bold, which is his nature. A lot of talk that, hey, we won't let you get hurt here in the state of New York. What can the state actually do to fill the gap for people who are very concerned that their Medicaid will be cut and everything else?
Well, I mean, one of the things the governor's proposed is a tax, naming it after the Republicans, one of them, Collins, who propose shifting the cost over to the state. So the governor says we'll have to propose a new tax and name it after these couple of Republicans who are the ones that are pursuing this avenue where they're going to shift the cost of the state. But we have.
Wait, before we move on. So that tax would be similar to the kind of tax, if you will, that helped to fund Obamacare, and therefore we would have our own independent system.
That's correct. That's one of the proposals of the governor. That's absolutely correct.
You like that idea?
If it's going to save a lot of poor people, a lot of senior citizens especially, a lot of children with diseases, then we have no other choice. I mean, we have, as a society, we have an obligation to provide health care to these people. But, for several years now, Assemblyman Dick Gottfried has passed a bill for universal health care in the state of New York. It passed again this year. There's something that can resolve a lot of these problems.
It passed in the Assembly.
It passes in the Assembly, it dies in the Republican. But it's a real well thought of, the Senate, correct. It's a well thought of, good piece of legislation. I went to Taiwan a few years ago where they have universal care, health care. And a lot of the bill is modeled after that, and people are very happy with their healthcare system in Taiwan. People are very happy with their universal healthcare system in Japan. Why can't we duplicate that here in this country?
And so there's a hopeful sound for New Yorkers in what you're saying, that although of course nobody wants higher taxes, but everybody wants good health care. You think the tax burden will be difficult for many people, or do you think it'll be something within context of so that people will be able to afford
to be honest with you, I think that's an option. I don't think we're going to get to that.
Okay.
We've already had 3 Republicans in the U.S. Senate who are opposed to the new bill that's coming out of the Senate, and with those 3, you're not going to be able to pass, you're going to be able to repeal Obamacare.
So at this moment, there's nothing to say, and we'll wait and see on health care. But you're saying that is one of the ideas, and you and others might support that.
Well, absolutely. I would support universal health care tomorrow because I've seen the impact of it in other countries, and it's been fantastic.
We've had conversations, brief conversations about the nature of immigrants in your district, and I think there's just an immense amount of fear. Just today, the Supreme Court started the process of ruling on the various executive orders that the president has put out. What's your thought on that? And Mayor de Blasio and the governor talk about how New York is going to be a sanctuary and everything else. Are we really going to be able to do that? Or is there something more difficult that people who are afraid should actually be afraid of?
Well, I mean, the entire discussion today, the whole issue about immigrants and how this particular president wants to blame everything that's wrong in this country on immigrants, is putting us in a terrible light throughout the world, and it's creating a lot of concern here in this country. And I would tell immigrants, on people that are undocumented, to make sure they take certain steps, to be very careful about what they do, and our immigrants to start, the process of trying to become citizens, do whatever they can, because you cannot predict with this particular president and members of Congress and the Senate who ideology trumps intelligence. All they want to do.
Ironic choice of words.
It's just I've never seen it. I've been involved in politics for 30 years, and I've never seen this kind of just disgraceful rhetoric coming out, blaming people that are Muslims. The hypocrisy.
And certainly your district, which certainly has many Bangladeshis and
very many Muslims. You talk about
Muslims.
these countries that he wants to put on the list, and yet he doesn't talk about Saudi Arabia, which is probably the biggest exporter of terrorism in the entire world.
And he just cut a
huge deal with them. So it's just
yeah.
an amount of hypocrisy that's there is just incredible.
Back to some local issues. I guess I'm going to ask it this way: who controls the MTA? Who should really be responsible right now? The mayor and governor are passing the buck on this. But right now, I think we've had many incidents on the subway. I'm sensing an increasing dissatisfaction with the state of the MTA, where I think for a while we were getting better, but now it's almost like chronically worse. The trains are slow. I mean, people in the Bronx know it like they know their own name.
Yes.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, and when you couple that with what's going on with highways, with our roads and all the traffic jams, it exacerbates already a bad situation. The governor, when you were opening up the Second Avenue line, was at the forefront taking credit for everything that went well with it. But when you ask him about the problems with the MTA recently, his response is, well, I don't know who runs the MTA. I mean, the reality is that the buck stops with him. He appoints the members of the MTA. And so for him to say that he doesn't know who runs it or who's responsible it's kind of disingenuous at best.
What's the answer to our friends and neighbors who probably, as we speak, are sitting in a hot subway, not being able to move up the number 5 train or the number 2 train?
Well, the repairs and work have to be done. I didn't particularly care for Joe Lhota as mayor, but I think he was a very good chair of the MTA, and I think that's what he's best suited for. So I think appointing him was a good move. But there's a lot of work to be done, and the reality is that the constituents, people that take the train, have to keep the pressure on the governor and on all of us for that matter, because I don't see the situation getting better anytime soon. We
did a show a couple of weeks ago with the AAA to talk about traffic, and one of the numbers that came out was something like 125,000 new cars. I forget what period of time, over the last 5 years or something like that.
And I think they all park in the Cross Bronx Expressway.
Well, either that or on many of our roads. I mean, you can't even get across Marshall Loop Parkway or Pelham Parkway. What solution could there be? I mean, and I know you, even before you were an elected official, we did a show with you on the Cross Bronx Expressway. Any relief coming anywhere, or is it simply a matter of road infrastructure money?
Well, it's the money, and it's the works that are happening right now at the same time that's creating traffic problems throughout the city. But we have to get off of cars. We have to use more mass transportation system to improve it. Cross Bronx Expressway is a death highway, as you know. More carcinogens being spewed through there because all of the traffic and all the diesel fuel that pours more carcinogen into our areas, it's getting worse. It's a parking lot. Children that live around the area are suffering from more cases of asthma. It's a problem.
Your office is literally right above.
I'm right by one of the worst intersections in the entire United States, in the exit 4B, the Bronx River exit off the Cross Bronx Expressway. It's a problem that I think if other segments of this country the level of asthma that existed amongst children was duplicated in other segments of society in this country, they would probably
You think
do
we'd
more
have
to
some
resolve
action?
it. Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Very, very interesting. Let's talk about the local politics before we get into your own plans. Senator Diaz, whose district intersects with yours,
Yes.
is going to be running for, or is, I guess, running for city council. And your colleague in the assembly, Mark Jonai, is also running for city council. I wonder if people of the Bronx are just tired of this idea that, well, he didn't like the job there, now he's going to run there. And at each play, it seems to, rather than encourage other people to run, there seems to be kind of a little trading horses. You take that spot, I'll take his spot. What do you make of that political situation in the Bronx?
There's a process there for everyone to run. Just because someone's been an elected official for a long time doesn't mean that they're not a good elected official. In the case of Senator Diaz, for example, here's a guy who's represented this community even before he was elected as a city councilman years ago, and then he went up to the Senate, who did a lot of work with the community, a lot of work with our seniors. I once worked as his chief of staff. I know his office very well. He gets over 12,000 constituent visits a year, and I dare to say that's probably the biggest number in the entire state. And
does he deal with visits is one thing, but you think he's he's good with those constituents?
There's a reason why. I know how you feel about the electoral system, but even in primaries in the Bronx, when you get over 95% of the vote in a primary, that's a good indicator of how popular you are within your constituents. And he does a lot of work for them, and he insists that his staff provide services to seniors, support people. You hear a lot of the negative stuff about Senator Diaz, because of the social issues of abortion and same-sex marriage. But those aren't the only two issues that define him as a leader in the state. I think in terms of what he does for the people that we represent, and we represent, generally speaking, a poorer population, he does fantastic work, and that's why he's popular.
I guess I'm going to lobby back for what my contention was in the beginning. Isn't this, though, losing with term limits in the city council? Are we losing an opportunity to get new blood in our elected? And wouldn't it be nice to have some young people who are just getting started to take over that job?
If the person that is currently in the position, or the person who's seeking a new position hasn't done a good job, if I'm not doing my job, I've been now an elected representative of the 87th Assembly District for 5 terms. If you don't believe that I'm doing a good job, just because I've been here for 5 years doesn't make me a bad elected official. You can vote me out of office. So, I lose patience with the argument that just because somebody may have been there 10, 15 years, that they should move aside for someone new. No, move aside if you're not doing a good job. If you are doing a good job, then why? Why lose seniority? Why lose knowledge of the way the system works, the way to get legislation through and budget? These are things that we acquire experience as we're elected longer in office. It's not a bad thing to be elected a long term. It's a bad thing if you're elected for a long period and you're not doing your job.
Do we need, this goes back to state issues, political reform in the New York State legislature? It's been attempted numerous times and seems to languish each time around.
Well, I believe that there's some reforms that should take place. For example, I think that, and this will probably upset some of my colleagues, but I think having term limits on committee chairs should be something that we should consider. Maybe.
And should they be tied to the majority?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's how the Republicans are not going to give that up in the Senate, and we're not going to give it up in the Assembly. But certainly, there are other reforms that we could have, the way legislation is passed, the way legislation is reviewed. These are things that could happen. But in terms of the electoral process of us getting reelected, you have a constitution that's created already that said how we get elected or reelected. And so being an elected official, again, for many years is not a bad thing if you're doing your job.
Well, now we've got to ask you the direct question. So, the rumors are out there. We read all the blogs. We read all the news stories that if Senator Diaz, in fact, does get elected to the 18th, I think it's the 18th Council District, that when there is a special election, Assemblyman Louis Sepulveda would be interested in that Senate seat. Is it true?
Well, Gary, I've been around the 32nd Senate District for almost 30 years now.
Because your assembly district intersects with that
but
one.
not only that, but before that, I was once, I worked for several state senators. I was a chief of staff in the 32nd Senate District for Senator Diaz. I know that community like the back of my hand. I know many people that live there and work there. Even after redistricting, there are a lot of people in that community that I know, and a lot of leaders in those communities, people that are not necessarily elected in elected positions, who know me, and we've worked closely. So I think that if and when Senator Diaz wins the election, because I believe he's going to win, that I would certainly consider running for that position.
And why would you do that? You've justified it at least by saying, well, I've a lot of people in the neighborhood, I know the district, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little more money, we understand that.
Well, it's not any more money, it's the same salary.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
Yeah. And in fact, I would be going to the minority as it stands today.
So then why would you want to do that? You've got a relatively secure seat in the assembly at this point. Why do that?
Well, because I like to think myself as a person who's more interested in policy than politics. And one of the things that I try to do every day as an elected official is to look at things from the point of view of how I can help people that live in my community. And if I can bring that perspective to a wider range of people, then why not? I don't. To me, being an elected official is a sacrifice. I have a law practice. I've been a relatively successful lawyer, and being an elected official cuts into the amount of time I can spend in my law practice. People don't realize the sacrifice on your families, but I have a strong belief in public service and in being able to help my community. And I think what I've been doing in the assembly speaks for itself. And if I can do that for a wider range of people, then I'm going to make that attempt.
Real quick, you did a study of asthma. I guess you've already alluded to it by talking about increase in asthma. Real quick, we got like 10 seconds.
Right.
Just give us a summary.
Well, it's still we still ranked the worst county in terms of asthma for kids. I propose legislation to do a study that passed both the Republican House and the Senate. We're waiting to see if the governor's going to sign it, because I think that's a major problem that we have in our city.
Thank you so much. You'll come back, I assume.
Absolutely.
You've always been a great guest. Thank you, Assemblyman Louis Sepulveda. Now, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org. You can send us a tweet at BronxTalk or post them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. You can check out the archives, of course, at BronxNet.org. BronxTalk is on that lower right navigation bar. Now, we will have some other elected officials coming up on Bronx Talk over the next several weeks. July 10th, it's State Senator Jamal Bailey, and the 17th, the chairman of the Bronx Democratic County Committee, Marcos Crespo, will join us. He'll answer some of the similar questions that we asked tonight. Thanks to Lindsay, our producer, Brianna, our director, to the cast of thousands, to you, to him. Good night.
Troll teeth.
That my voice sounded like a possessed baby doll.
That no one would ever love someone as stupid as me.
That I was fat, ugly.
Disgusting.
The effect of bullying is potent.
We will no longer be the silent majority.
Now, when you see online bullying, there's something you can do about it.
We're gonna take action with the I.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness, and so are you.